gonna play that. I don't want a copyright strike. What's going on, friends? I'm Sean Pierce Johnson, and welcome to this week's episode of Stomp Box Saturday. I'm very excited for this one. We're going to be taking a look at the brand new Venus Tube Overdrive from Crazy Tube Circuits. And when I say tube overdrive, yes, there is indeed a 12AX7 preamp tube. There are vents to help cool down the heat from that tube on both sides of the pedals enclosure, and it takes a lot of design cues, or pretty much all of its design cues, from the various iterations of the BK Butler Tube Driver, famously used by guys like Eric Johnson. That's really the only one that's coming to my mind right now, and quite frankly, that's kind of the pinnacle of this pedal for my personal taste. But this thing is just chock full of great sounds. It is so much fun. I'm really glad I got a chance to take a look at it. But before I start gushing about it too much, let's do a little rundown of the controls so that we know what exactly we're getting into once we get into the tone shaping. The beauty part of this pedal is it all runs off of a standard center negative 9-volt power supply that you plug into the top of the pedal's enclosure along with your in and out jacks. So you top jack maximalists, you're gonna be very happy here. We have 6 controls as knobs and 2 controls as buttons. The top row is volume, bias, and drive. The bottom row is going to be high, mid, and low. Great, we have a 3-band EQ for this tube driver style overdrive pedal. Now volume and drive are going to be pretty self-explanatory. We see it on other overdrive pedals, but bias, what exactly is that? Well, various versions of the tube driver over the years had a bias control, and essentially what this is doing is it's regulating the amount of voltage that's being fed into the circuit and overall affects the sort of compression and squishiness of the overdrive sound. At its most fully clockwise position, you're going to be hearing more open, less compressed tones. But the further back you turn it counterclockwise, you start starving that voltage. You get things that sound a lot more squishy, pillowy, and a bit gated. We can go from a nice tube-style overdrive to a gated fuzz very quickly just by turning the one control. Now, if the Venus just had these 6 knobs, we'd be perfectly fine, but it's these 2 buttons that allow us a little bit more versatility from the pedal. First, the tight button in between the 2 rows of knobs. This affects the input of the Venus and essentially shaves off some low end so that frequency band doesn't get as compressed and distorted as quickly. Helps tighten up the lows so that the overall sound just feels maybe a bit stiffer, less pillowy, and quite frankly, if I'm going for rhythm guitar sounds, I tend to always have that on. And then finally, we have the line driver, which is just an on-off switch. This is taken from the rack mount versions of the tube driver pedal so that you get a little boost on the output to maybe drive the front end of your amp a little bit harder, increase the output of this pedal, so maybe you're trying to go for just a nice, really light gain overdrive, but you don't want to overdo it with the volume control. You can make up for it with the line driver. And now let's finally get to turning some knobs and hearing what the Venus can do properly. Let's start by putting all knobs for drive, volume, and the 3-band EQ at 12 o'clock and just experiment with this bias control. We're gonna leave the tight switch off for this one, just to get a sense of what exactly that does to the sound that we're getting out of this pedal. I think you'll be pretty surprised at some of the results. Now finally, let's take a listen to what the two buttons do. First the tight and then the line driver. This should be fairly obvious what the difference is with the line driver, maybe not so much with the tight. So pay close attention and check back and forth. The guys at Crazy Tube Circuits have really gone out of their way to make sure that Venus packs all the tube driver goodness into a very easy to use package, and at the same time bring it into the modern day. Tube drivers are very hard to come by in good working order. They often require a bit of modification as well. But this thing, it's got everything you need right here in a reliable package. So now all that's left to do is show you a few of my favorite sounds that I've gotten with Venus. This is my favorite sound if I were to use Venus as the baseline distortion for a gig. The real key here, there's three of them. Bias control, fully clockwise so that the sound is as open as possible. We have the tight switch on and the line driver is on. That extra little output boost is just helping to fine-tune unity gain with my clean sound. Since Venus is a tube driver style pedal, it stands to reason that we should shoot for that Eric Johnson kind of sound. He famously used it all over his classic recordings, still uses a variation today, and this is what I've come up with Venus to get as close to that as possible. And I spent a lot of time referencing photos of Eric's different boards and rigs with a tube driver on it, but at the end of the day, had to use my ears to try to cop the sound as closely as I possibly could. Try it out for yourself, but I think this is pretty dang close. One last setting for good measure, this time with a very extreme bias setting for a very cool squishy tube fuzz. And there you have it, friends. That is the Venus Tube Overdrive pedal from Crazy Tube Circuits. I love this thing. I am so glad that the guys sent this for me to check out. I've always wanted to have a tube driver in the arsenal. I have a tube fuzz, but I don't have anything that's like tube overdrive. And this just ticks so many different boxes. It's just glorious stuff. And I want to let you know, I actually did get to use this in a live scenario to actually test it out. I played my church youth group's Anthem Night event, which was a much bigger kind of invite night with lots of production, big sound, and this was the main boost in front of my Dirty Boy preamp pedal. And those two pedals together, the Venus and the Dirty Boy, seemed to be meant for each other. It was a glorious combination of sounds that, man, I can't wait to play with again. This might become a permanent fixture on the church pedal board, and in a very fuzzy setting, at the same time. So my goal of getting fuzz onto a worship pedal board has kind of been accomplished. But I'd like to know what you thought of the Venus Overdrive. Do you have a specific sound that you'd like to hear with it, or you have other questions about it? Whatever it is, let me know in the comments section down below, and I'll do everything I can to get back to each and every one of you. Thank you all so much for spending part of your day with me and watching this video. I hope you enjoyed yourself, and if you did, I'd really appreciate it if you click the subscribe button and rang the notification bell. Those are very small things that you can do, and they don't cost you anything, but trust me, every single time one of you does that, it makes a world of difference here on the channel and the discoverability of my videos. But if you want to go one step beyond that, I'd love it if you joined my email club to help keep you up to date on things that are happening here, new videos, blog posts, and gigs that I might be playing near you. And if you want to go one step beyond that, just use the affiliate links that I have in the description box down below. Each one helps me earn a small commission that I can use to help keep the lights on here in the studio. Thank you all for joining me for this week's episode featuring the Venus Tube Overdrive. I hope you have a great rest of your week. And until I see you next time, I'm Sean Pierce Johnson, wishing you all watching great tone, great health, and of course, happy stomping. Cheers, friends. God bless.